Speedrun build guide for Pox. So this is Stormwolf. We're taking Tempest Roar to turn our Storm skills into Werewolf skills, Disobedience because it's broken, Dark Howl so we can turn Debilitating Roar into a Werewolf skill so we can use it, and it also gives us an Immobilize. Temerity because it's broken, Ghostwalkers because it's broken. We're also going to take Accelerating Aspects for when our core skills critically strike to give us 25% attack speed. Pretty much will be up 100% of the time. Dire Wolf to turn our Grizzly Rage into a werewolf thing, but more importantly, it also will reduce our spirit cost reduction of Tornado to 75%. This is important. We technically can make this 100%, but we don't want to, and I'll explain why in a second. 75% is actually where we want it to be. Storm Chaser, so our tornadoes seek targets. Rampaging Werebeast is the busted component to this build. It's kind of like Gore's gloves for Whirlwind. This probably has a higher damage cap than Whirlwind, but it can't get there as fast as Whirlwind. So essentially every critical strike that we do will raise our critical strike damage by 10%. This doesn't have a cap, so it's just as many critical strikes as you can dish out. This is why we're using Tornado, because Tornado hits multiple times per second. So essentially you want as many tornadoes hitting multiple times per second to cap this as high as you can get it before Grizzly Rage's timer runs out, which also means that Grizzly Rage's uptime is important. We want it to be active pretty much always. So how we're going to do that is we have the extended 5 seconds here. We also have the 25% extension down here. And then we have Calm Before the Storm. Every lucky hit is going to refund our cooldown for Grizzly Rage so that we can get it back and have it up as often as humanly possible. Critical strikes are also going to heal us. This is going to be infinite, which is just an infinite heal. An infinite heal that feeds Temerity, which gives us an infinite barrier. So these two combinations is going to be really strong for staying alive, as well as, again, all our critical strikes are going to feed our damage, and this will all be infinite. We're also going to take the Earth and Skill Tree, Earth and Might key passive applies to our Storm skills. We're using all Storm skills, and Earth and Might is a key component to the build. We're doing more crit damage to vulnerable enemies on our weapon. We're taking damage reduction everywhere we can get it. We're taking armor because armor feeds damage reduction until the 85% cap. That'll be helped by Disobedience. Taking 10% damage reduction from elites, 30 times 30% critical strike damage. This is massive. Extends the duration of ultimates. Get our ultimate back and then heals us. We already went over this. We are taking a generator, but we're hoping to never use it. This is like an oh shit scenario if something goes really wrong in your in what you're doing. This is to get you back going, but you should never need this. Tornado. This is another important factor. Each time Tornado is cast, there's 20% chance to cast an additional Tornado. We're going to be infinitely spamming Tornadoes, so the goal is to get like, I don't know, 100 tornadoes on screen at one time, and those tornadoes are going to be hitting for billions of damage if you have the uptime and you can do it fast enough. Tornadoes are also proc vulnerable, maximum spirit, more damage from our tornado. Basic skills refund, so if we ever have to use this, we just get spirit back a little bit faster. We have a higher critical strike chance to close enemies. This really doesn't matter once Earth and Might gets procced, but to get Earth and Might procced the very first time, this is important. Damage reduction, fortify, heal. This is an oh shit button. You can take this late game. You can take Bloody Howl for earlier Nightmare dungeons when it's easier, because it resets on kill, and you can just feed yourself spirit heals and attack speed. So more attack speed, more tornadoes. Increases non-physical resistances, damage reduction. We have 2 defensive skills, so we definitely want to be using more DR. Hurricane to proc vulnerable and to slow. I'm sorry, in this case, late game, so you can use vulnerable early. Tornado will do it later, and then you use this to also do more damage reduction. You essentially, staying alive is a big factor for beating late Diablo 4. Storm skills all have a chance to proc vulnerable for 3 seconds. We want vuln uptime 100% of the time. So all of our tornadoes, like if we have 90 up, you should have 100% vuln uptime. Hurricane lasts 15% longer to again keep the damage reduction. Poisoned enemies are slowed by 8%. And that is going to allow us to trigger poisoning on all targets when we critical strike with the werewolf skill. We're going to be critical striking 100% of the time, which means we're going to be poisoning 100% of the time, which gives us times 30% additional critical strike damage. And that's going to be up 100% of the time. Nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. Nature magic skills that consume spirit will heal you. This is why we don't want to make this 100% resource cost reduction, but there's a bigger reason why we don't want this to be resource cost reduction. I'll go over that in a little bit. Your earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. All enemies are going to be your storm skills deal 12% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. Our debilitating roar can immobilize poisoned enemies. And then we can knock back with varying different things, right? Like Cyclone Armor can knock back, and we can trigger this extra 12% multiplier. Grizzly Rage is probably the most broken ultimate for druids. So for werewolves, it's going to give us movement speed, a consistent heal, and resource cost reduction, I believe, for our tornado on its uptime. We're also going to be unstoppable the entire time, which is why Ghostwalkers is so strong, because we get the illusionary aspect. We will be capped movement speed, so you're going to be moving 200% faster all the time when Grizzly Rage is active, but also we can move freely through enemies, and that's huge for not dying. You gain Fortify every second while you're in that state too, so we're always going to have capped Fortify. And then the skill that's actually making this all kind of really busted. So you have a 5% chance on lucky hit to restore all your spirit, and then everything thereafter for 5 seconds is a critical strike. So 100% critical strike without having to dive too deep into critical strike chance, and then all your spirit is refunded. We're going to get the resource cost reduction of Tornado down to like single digits, like 3, 4 spirit cost. And then that is, you're literally never going to see your spirit move, but you are actually using spirit, which is important. That's how we're getting our consistent heal. But also, we want to proc the legendary node. Which one is it? This one. So after you use 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. So we don't want our tornadoes not to be taking any spirit. We just don't want our spirit to move when we cast. That way, every 75 spirit, we get an additional 30% increased damage. The reason our spirit's never going to move is because critical strikes with our skills is going to restore 2 spirit. So you have 90 tornadoes up at one time, all of them critical striking 100% of the time. You're going to get thousands of spirit back per second, and you're only casting a tornado to that costs like 5 spirit, so you're never going to be down on spirit. You also restore spirit to max when Earth Might procs, but it's a non-factor. This is also why your generator is a non-factor if you're doing this right. And then for those 5 seconds that you have 100% critical strike uptime, if you have 90 something tornadoes up, then your Grizzly Rage will automatically reset, because even at a low proc chance or a lucky hit proc chance on Calm Before the Storm, no matter what this percentage is, you're going to be blowing through your cooldown. It'll just disappear. So essentially what you want to be doing, because it costs nothing to cast Tornado, is just spamming tornadoes nonstop. It will cost you no resource. Those tornadoes will then, even at an 8% lucky hit chance, is going to proc Earth and Might. Earth and Might's going to proc 100% critical strike chance, and then you become God. During that time, depending on how many tornadoes you have up, every one critting, multiple times per second for that 5-second window is then going to stack your critical damage to whatever crazy number you can get that number to. And then since you have consistent tornadoes up all the time, as soon as Earth and Might goes off its cooldown, it'll pop immediately again, and you're straight back into continuing to do 100% critical strike chance. Paragon board, we have 4 legendaries and 5 glyphs, all maxed out, so all the glyphs have maximum potential. The 4 legendaries, as we were talking about, restore spirit on crit, because we're going to be critting 100% of the time. This is just going to be an absurd amount of spirit. When we use 75 spirit, we're going to deal 30% increased damage. Storm skills deal 30% increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. So every tornado is going to, proc vulnerable, and then that vulnerable is going to give us 30 more crit damage. And then this one too, since all our tornadoes are also going to be poisoning enemies, for 3 or more poisoned enemies nearby, you deal 45% increased flat damage, which is a massive amount of flat damage increase. So we grab these 4 for massive damage increase, and then for glyphs, we're taking Werewolf up front because it's a willpower on the willpower board. We max that out to get the most damage from that. We're going to take Spirit for the massive amounts of critical strike damage. You can see how this is all starting to stack with crit damage. We're going to take Undaunted for the increased damage while fortified. We're going to be fortified 100% of the time. We're going to take Vulnerable damage, so Exploit. That's another increase in flat damage for vulnerable. We don't actually need the secondary effect here because we're going to have 100% vulnerability anyway from the tornadoes. And then we're taking damage to close targets and the damage reduction later in the game for more damage. That's pretty much it. So essentially, the way it plays, you walk into a dungeon, you start spamming out tornadoes. The moment Earth and Might procs one time, you become God, and you just go. You run through the dungeon. You just constantly are spamming tornadoes as you go. Those tornadoes are going to bring down you're going to pop Grizzly Rage and then obviously go once your Earth and Might procs, but that's going to reduce your cooldown. Grizzly Rage is going to be up for like 30 seconds every single time that you proc it. All your tornadoes are going to proc Envenom because they're all going to be poisoning. If you get in an oh shit situation where you need to back off, you just pop Debilitating Roar. That's going to decrease everything's damage to you by 70%, but it also will immobilize all enemies. You'll be able to move through them freely because you're going to be unstoppable while in Grizzly Rage, so you can just run right through the immobilized enemies if you need to make space or get away from them, and then just keep casting tornadoes. And then every tornado you can get out as fast as your attack speed will allow. That's why we're taking Accelerating Aspect. The more tornadoes you get, the more enhanced tornado procs that you get, the more damage you're going to stack on your infinitely stacking critical damage aspect. You could probably get 1,000 to 2,000% increased crit damage easily with this build. It will be the hardest hitting build in the game. And yeah. Pulverize is good. Pulverize will clear all content in the game. It won't have anywhere near the damage threshold or the cap this build has. Additionally, I forgot to mention something about stats. You want to stack vulnerability damage on your weapons and totems. You want to stack damage reduction on your chest and anywhere that you can get it. You want to get crit chance, even though we're going to have 100% crit chance, we still need to proc Earth and Might one time, so crit chance does still help getting that first initial proc. We want maximum crit damage, that's where all our damage is coming from. The more you have as a base, the better that Werebeast becomes when it comes to stacking crit damage. And then you want main stat and resource, or not main stat, you want a combination of lucky hit chance and main stat as your other primaries. So vuln damage on weapons and anywhere that you can get it, damage reduction on pieces that you can get damage reduction on, crit damage obviously, and then lucky hit chance and main stat. Lucky hit chance, if we can get it higher, the more things like lucky hit on calm before the storm will proc with tornadoes, even though we're going to have a ton of tornadoes hitting at once. Just improving lucky hit just makes that more consistent, so just giving it from a couple different pieces or a couple different sources just to get it higher is always helpful. There you go.